I'm going to spank him in boxing, right? In my opinion, he can't lace my boots in boxing. What time does the UFC fighter go, hang on a minute, how much money is in the pot here? Kind of need me, don't you? I mean, I'm the talent. Without me, do you even have a show? Yeah, maybe you can put someone else on. But I've just sold this arena out. I'm just racking you up 400,000 or 500,000 pay-per-view buys. In boxing, the majority of the revenue from the show goes to the fighter. In MMA, the majority of the revenue from the show goes to the promoter. And I'm not interested in a fake belt. I'm not interested in changing the Muhammad Ali Act. I'm not interested in changing the shape of the ring.
Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you guys are all doing well. So Eddie Hearn, again, last night at the Jerome Ennis post-fight press conference, had some more words for Dana White. Throughout the week, he's, said some things to Dana White as well. And really, strange for me. Dana White's obviously said that he's coming into boxing. And for me, very strange that Eddie Hearn seems to have just taken this so personally. Dana White said he's going to come into boxing. Obviously, he promoted Crawford against Canelo. Yes, I think that Turki Al-Sheikh probably did most of the work. But Dana White was obviously the promoter. Turki Al-Sheikh has obviously said that, Dana White's going to come in and do well and things of that nature. But I don't think that Dana White has been disrespectful in saying anything. And I think he's actually been, relatively complimentary of Eddie Hearn in pretty much all the, recent interviews. So, very strange that Eddie Hearn has just, taken this so personally. And obviously, let's break down some of the things that he said. So number one, saying, and I think actually Eddie Hearn has, made this actually very personal. Saying that, he's got an open book in boxing. These fighters can see exactly, what they're earning and, how valuable they are to the show. Whereas in MMA, these guys, they're earning just a small percentage and all the money's going to Dana and the guys at the top. I mean, look, let's be honest here. Eddie Hearn mentioned Anthony Joshua's name. Do I think that Eddie Hearn has got an open book policy with Anthony Joshua? Yes. Anthony Joshua has made arguably the most money in British boxing history. He's a massive name in England with his sponsorships and purses. So yes, you will have an open book with him. You may have an open book with Jerome Ennis. But are you having an open book with the other fighters? I don't think so. Do you have an open book with Dillian White? Probably not. Do you have an open book with maybe a Jack Catterall or Justice Hooney or these other guys that you have, Jaya Pataya? I don't think that you actually do, to be honest with you. So, not 100% accurate from Eddie Hearn. I think he does, talk some truth in the fact that I think, I think the model is different, and I do agree with that. Again, I don't feel like he needed to go personal. He's obviously made a, plea to some of these MMA fighters. Dana White's not going to like that because now you're really, talking bad about his business. And essentially saying that Dana White is using fighters. So for me, I don't feel like Eddie Hearn needed to go down that path. I think Dana White, I think obviously the model is different in terms of, I think at the top level of boxing, the Furies, the Usyks, the Joshuas, the Canelos, these guys at the top make a lot more than the UFC fighters. But I actually think at the lower levels of boxing, I think that the guys at the low level of UFC, in terms of lower down the card, some of the smaller shows, I think that those smaller guys will actually make more money than the boxing guys. There are fighters that have been on Matchroom shows, on top rank shows, some of the early fights. Some of those guys are fighting essentially for free. Some of them don't even get a purse. They're essentially, fighting for the opportunity. So I think the lower levels of boxing, most of those guys, have second jobs and then they're really not earning anything. Whereas again, the top guys, the Usyks, the Furies, the Joshuas, those are the ones that are making all the big money. I think in terms of UFC, I think, people have been critical of Dana White. I think there are some things you can critique. However, with that being said, I do think he deserves a lot of respect in terms of, that sport, it was really nowhere until Dana White came. He's, brought it from the ground up and now UFC is massive. These events at the Sphere going on, Las Vegas. So I think, Dana White's done a fantastic job. And for me, when Dana White says things that, like boxing, he's going to come into boxing is broken. Where he's coming from is, I mean, boxing is broken to a certain degree. Turki Al-Sheikh has come into boxing and, really is starting to turn it around. And I think he does deserve a lot of credit. But let's look at, the two biggest guys in American boxing right now. Canelo Alvarez, look at who Canelo Alvarez has been fighting over, the last, 6-7 years. The John Ryders, Munguia, Berlanga. This is what Dana White's talking about. We never got the, David Benavidez against Canelo fight. Gervonta Davis is now fighting a YouTuber. Gervonta Davis at lightweight could fight Shakur Stevenson. He could rematch Lamont Roach in a fight where, some people thought that he lost. He could fight a Devin Haney, a Teofimo Lopez. Those fights are never going to happen. When it was, when Khabib and Conor McGregor had their beef, when Khabib had his argument with Lobov, Conor McGregor's training partner, when Conor McGregor did what he did at the bus, that fight happened. There was no marinating that fight. There was no waiting for 4, 5, 6 years, a decade in some cases. There was none of that. That was the biggest fight in the sport. That fight happened. So I think boxing is in a better place now. But let's not forget, even with Eddie Hearn, there was a fight on the table that did not happen. Anthony Joshua against Deontay Wilder, and I've said this numerous times, that would have been one of the biggest fights in boxing history. When Anthony Joshua was undefeated, Anthony Joshua, knockout artist from England, talks well, doesn't really trash talk, great marketability. Deontay Wilder, brash, 100% knockout ratio, talks a lot, he'll sell the fight. England against America. I mean, that fight would have been a promoter's dream. That fight essentially should have happened. It would have been for Undisputed at one point. And I don't think that Eddie Hearn and Anthony Joshua really wanted that fight. We've never seen, Anthony Joshua versus Wilder, Tyson Fury. We've never seen that mix. So I think there are a lot of things in boxing that do need to improve. And I don't think that these promoters can just turn around and say that it was all great and, Dana White's not going to do anything. It's Turki Al-Sheikh that's made a lot of the changes. I don't think we would have seen Beterbiev Bivol if it wasn't for Turki Al-Sheikh. I don't think we would have seen a lot of these other guys risk it. For Floyd Mayweather, for as good as he is and good as he was, I think that a lot of fighters, try and protect the O. I think, promoters have, taken that as well, trying to protect their fighter. So I have no issue with Dana White saying that boxing has been broken. A lot of casuals that watch boxing, they're watching Jake Paul against Mike Tyson. They're watching Jake Paul against Gervonta Davis. They're thinking that this is what boxing is. I'm glad that, there is some competition now. I'm glad that, Turki Al-Sheikh has come into boxing and really, started to work with everyone. There's a lot of ego in boxing. I think we all know that. Yeah, those are my thoughts. Again, very surprised to see that, Eddie Hearn, has really taken it personally with Dana White. I don't think that was necessary. I think that there are some things in UFC that, could improve. But I do think Dana White deserves a lot of respect in terms of, where he's brought that sport to. Of course, the fighters deserve their credit. But I do think Dana White has done a very good job. So, those are my thoughts. As always, interested, in what you guys have got to say. Please let me know in the comments below. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you guys on the next one.